Hello, and today we're going to look at conservation priorities. And the sort of subheadings to this is we're going to look at the International Union for Conservation and Nature, its role, the IUCN Red List categories, and the criteria for selection for categorization. Okay, so let's start off with a problem. And the problem is that human activities such as habitat loss, exploitation, and eradication, as well as things like invasive species, means that a lot of habitats and organisms and communities of organisms are in trouble, resulting in population declines and loss of ecosystem resources and services. The problem is there are hundreds of thousands of species out there, and we don't know very much about most of them. So we need to make priorities to share or direct limited resources for best effect. And we call this making priorities. And this is quite challenging. So a international organization was set up, and this is the International Union for Conservation and Nature, the IUCN. And its roles was to coordinate global data on biodiversity conservation, and this sort of was to fill that data gap, try and collect everything that everyone knew and decide on next steps based off of good information. Its other role is to increase understanding of the importance of biodiversity. So start to use that information to persuade policymakers and educate the public, and to deploy nature-based solutions to global challenges. And this includes things like climate change, food, and sustainable development. So use the information they gather, educate people onto the benefits, and then try and solve some of the underlying issues that have developed over the last couple of hundred years as human population growth and consumption has increased. So when they are looking at organisms and they have to do quite a lot of study, they decide on a category for it once they have properly studied it, and we call this the red list, and it describes or categorizes how close to extinction. So it's quite a negative measure, really. It's like, how bad is it really? And there are a number of categories, and you will see extinct as our worst one. So there are no known individuals left. So it's completely gone. So the dodo would be an example. extinct in the wild. So this is where only individuals survive in captivity, which means basically that its habitat has been degraded to such an extent that it can only sort of remain in existence in very carefully controlled and usually quite expensive conditions. Next one we have is critically endangered. So this is where it's at a very high risk of extinction in the wild. So its habitat, its population, its exploitation or eradication is such an extent that it's really struggling. Endangered. This means that it's at high risk of extinction. And vulnerable. Which means that it's at high risk of becoming endangered. And these central three are what we call our threatened categories, and these are usually where the most focus is deployed because these animals are at most risk of our extinction events. We then have near threatened. So they are likely to become endangered in near future. We've got least concern. So this is at lowest risk of becoming endangered. And data deficient. Which means they have not enough information to make a categorization. Which in some ways is the most worrying one because you then don't know if it's at significant risk or not. It's just flying blind and it might be getting ignored. So there are a number of features that are used to identify if a species is going to be selected to be categorized as vulnerable or endangered or critically endangered, so our threatened criteria. Obviously, if it's extinct in the wild or extinct, then that's fairly self-explanatory, but these ones have to be carefully considered. So with vulnerable, it has a 40% population decline either over 10 years or 3 generations. An area of habitat that's less than 2,000 kilometers squared, less than 10 areas in which it's found. It's got 10,000 mature individuals in nature, and the probability of extinction is more than 10% in 100 years. So it's getting the real possibility of becoming extinct is becoming more and more likely. Endangered is 60% population decline in 10 years or 3 generations. It only has less than 500 kilometers squared. The number of areas it's found is less than 5. The number of mature adults is less than 2,500. And it's got a 20% chance in 20 years or 5 generations becoming extinct. And the last one here is our critically endangered. Population has massively declined, more than 80%. The area in which it inhabits is less than 10 kilometers squared. So like a bad hurricane could completely trash the habitat of this species and wipe them all out. It's only found in one area, and the number of mature adults is 250 or less, meaning that it's got a more than 50% chance in 10 years or 3 generations becoming extinct.